Hey there. Tonight, we're diving into the grimy, chaotic life of a medieval barber-surgeon. Now, you might think a barber-surgeon just trims hair and shaves beards, but that's only half the story. In the Middle Ages, a barber-surgeon is the town's go-to for everything from cutting hair to pulling teeth, setting broken bones, and even performing crude surgeries, all with no university degree, no fancy diploma, just a sharp blade, a bucket, and a prayer. So, before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if this kind of content genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. All right? Turn off your lights, light a candle if you have one, pull your blanket a little tighter, and let the soft hum of a fan or the night's quiet lull your mind as we travel back nearly 700 years. You've just woken up in the year 1325, and you're a barber-surgeon. You give haircuts and amputations, sometimes on the same client, and today you'll be doing both before breakfast. Your mattress is a slightly upgraded pile of straw, meaning there are only 2 rats in it instead of 4. Your pillow is your own arm, which has fallen asleep faster than you did. You sit up, joints crackling like old bread crusts. And you remember, you have a full day of bleeding people, pulling teeth, and maybe sewing someone's scalp shut if you're feeling fancy. You don't have a degree. You don't even have formal training. You became a barber-surgeon because your uncle died and left you his tools, which included a rusty pair of shears, a bone saw, and something that might have been a leech jar, but now holds someone's molars. There's no licensing board, no continuing education, just enthusiasm, courage, and an extremely high tolerance for the smell of pus. How does one become a barber-surgeon? Step 1. Be too poor for university. Real doctors go to school. They sit in cold stone lecture halls and talk about humors and Aristotle while reading Latin textbooks no one understands. But you? You cut hair in the morning and perform battlefield triage in the afternoon. You're the working class hero of medieval medicine. Part stylist, part butcher, part wildly underqualified miracle worker. Your clinic is also your house. A wooden shack that smells like warm blood, old bread, and wet wool. You've nailed a red and white pole outside, the original barber pole, which is not just decorative, it's literal. The red represents blood, the white is bandages, and the pole itself? That's what your patients grip while you cut into them, so they don't punch you in the face. You don't have anesthesia. You do have ale. Sometimes a patient gets lucky and passes out before the knife hits bone. Most don't. Screaming is part of the process. You've learned to tune it out, like background music. The neighbors complain, but they still come to you when their cousin's foot turns green and starts smelling like spoiled onions. Today's schedule includes a shave for Father Cedric. Make sure you don't nick the mole. A boil lancing while wearing your worst tunic, and a full arm amputation with the guy who insists it's the left one, but he's delirious, so double check. Before you do anything, you take a moment to pray, not to God, but to St. Cosmos and St. Damien, the patron saints of medicine. You ask them to steady your hand and help you find the sharp knife. Not the one you dropped in the chicken coop yesterday. Your tools sit on a splintered table next to yesterday's lunch and a pigeon that refuses to leave. There's a razor for shaving, shears for haircuts, a cautery iron for burning flesh shut, heated in the fire until it glows like Satan's eyelids, and a saw for bigger problems. Everything is cleaned regularly, with urine, vinegar, or whatever's lying around that doesn't have visible bugs. You remember your mentor's advice. If it bleeds, it's alive. If it screams, you're doing it right. And if it stops both, well, bury it quick and say it was the plague. Barber surgeons like you are the Swiss Army knives of medieval healthcare. Need a haircut? You're in. Toothache? Yank it out. Arrow in your leg? You'll scream, then thank you. Skull fracture? You've got a hammer and absolutely no fear of litigation. In many towns, you're the only medical option that doesn't cost a year's wages and a sheep. People trust you, which is unfortunate. The worst part? You're actually better than the real doctors most of the time. They just wave incense, mutter about imbalanced humors, and bleed you until your soul starts leaving through your nose. At least you get results. You don't understand why tree panning, drilling holes in skulls to let the demons out, works. But sometimes it does. That's enough. You walk to your first appointment of the day. It's a woman with a bad tooth. You sit her in a chair that used to be a barrel, jam a wedge of wood between her jaws to keep her from biting, and grab your dental tongs. A pair of pliers you also use for boiling eggs. You wiggle the tooth. She screams. You keep going. She screams louder. You yank. Blood sprays. You hold up the tooth like a trophy. She thanks you with tears in her eyes and walks home holding a clump of rags to her face. She'll live. Probably. Next up is a minor surgery. A night squire has a festering wound on his thigh. He thinks it's cursed. You know it's just infected. You clean the area with wine. You're out of vinegar. Say something that sounds vaguely medical. This will purge the humors. And cut it open with a kitchen knife. The smell nearly kills you. You scrape out the pus with a spoon, slap on some moldy bread for its medicinal properties, and tie it shut with horsehair. He passes out. You leave him in the sun to dry. Midday break. You eat a lump of bread, 2 onions, and drink something that might be beer or weak broth. Either way, it helps with the smell. You take a moment to reflect. You are 27 years old. You have seen more open wounds than most modern doctors. You've lost count of how many limbs you've removed. You once stitched up a pig just to practice. And yet, you're technically still considered low class because your job also involves trimming beards. But you know the truth. You're essential. Without you, people die faster, scream longer, and smell even worse. You're the middleman between life and death, swinging scissors in one hand and a bone saw in the other. Night falls. You wash your tools in a bucket, clean your hands with stale ale, and lie down on your pile of straw and regret. Another day done. Another dozen lives mildly improved or slightly ruined. Either way, your work here is complete. You sleep with your shears under your head, just in case. You start your next day with scissors in one hand and a silent prayer in the other. Because this job, it's not just beard trims and bowl cuts. It's bloodletting, bone setting, boil lancing, and occasionally, Marriage counseling if someone starts screaming about the devil being lodged in their spouse's liver. Your clients? Anyone with a face, a limb, or an orifice. They come in for a shave and leave with fewer teeth and hopefully fewer symptoms. Sometimes they bring chickens as payment. Sometimes they bring nothing but screams. One man asked for a haircut and casually mentioned his thumb had been infected for a week. You trimmed his hair, lanced his thumb, and watched him faint into your firewood pile. No one calls this madness. They call it medicine. You hang your red and white pole outside your hut, not because you love flair, but because it tells the village you're open for bleeding. Literally. That pole? It's a sign that says, I cut things open, I sew things shut, and if your tooth is rotten, I'll yank it out with a grunt and a boot on your chest. And yes, you shave beards too. It's a strange duality, isn't it? One moment you're delicately shaping a nobleman's mustache. The next, you're draining pus from a carbuncle that looks like Satan sneezed on someone's back. No gloves, no antiseptic, no warning. There's no patient consent form, just a scream that sounds like a donkey in labor when your blade finds the festering spot. You tie them to a bench if they resist, or you sit on them if you're in a hurry. If it slips, you wipe your knife on your apron and keep going. If they die, well, at least their beard looked good. Your tools? A little of everything. Shears, razors, bone saws, clamps, hooks, cups for bleeding, and sometimes just your bare hands and a broken wooden spoon. You keep them sharp and close, and the villagers keep coming. Why? Because the physicians don't touch wounds. They talk about them. You handle them. The local lord sliced his thigh jousting? That's you. A peasant child fell into a fire? That's you, too. Toothaches, dog bites, arrow removals, hemorrhoids, and stubborn fevers that just need a little less blood in the body. You are the solution. Or at least, the attempt. And don't forget the bleeding. Bloodletting isn't just part of your job. It is the job. People come to you with headaches, and you say, "Ah, yes, too much blood." Then you make them lighter. Does it help? Sometimes. Does it kill them? Also, sometimes. But that's not your fault. That's the body being ungrateful. You know where the veins are. You know which ones bleed fast and which ones cause more screaming. You hold the arm, find the spot, and slice just enough to fill a bowl. Not too much or they faint. Not too little or they ask for a refund. Haircuts are peaceful days. You savor them. It's the only time your hands don't tremble. The only time the air doesn't smell like rot and iron. You chat. You laugh. You pretend this is all you do. Then the door creaks open, and someone's dragging in a man whose toe is black and spreading. You put down the comb. You pick up the blade. And maybe that's the core of it. You're not just a barber, not just a surgeon. You're the village's last hope, last resort, and only real option. You can't say no. There's no one else. And if you don't do it, the man dies. Or worse, lives long enough to spread whatever he's got to everyone else. So you do it, because someone has to. You wrap your leather apron tight, you whisper another prayer, and you get to work. It doesn't matter that your hands stink of sweat and blood. It doesn't matter that the tools were last cleaned with a bit of hay and river water. It doesn't matter that you're wearing the same shirt you wiped someone's intestines on last week. The next day, you open your eyes and reach instinctively for your tools, your closest friends, and fiercest enemies. Again, they hang by the window of your hut, catching what little sunlight filters through the thatched roof, not because you admire their craftsmanship, but because the sun might dry the fresh blood still clinging to their edges. You can almost hear the faint hiss of drying gore. You look at them carefully, because each one has a story, though most of those stories involve lots of screaming. First, the shears. They're old, with dull blades that could still cut a man's scalp, or his hair, if you're steady enough. You learned early on that a quick haircut builds trust. Nothing says, "I can also saw off your leg," like a neat trim. You clip hair for nobles and peasants alike. With a flick, you can turn the ragged into respectable. It's your quiet art, your only mercy in a brutal trade. Next to the shears, the knives. You have several, each designed for a specific kind of agony. The smallest one is for delicate work, cutting sutures, slicing into boils, or trimming ragged skin. It's sharp, dangerously so, but it's not the knife you want when you're facing a festering wound. The medium blade is your workhorse. It tears through flesh with brutal efficiency, but isn't too heavy to handle. Then there's the bone saw. It looks like a crude, jagged blade fixed to a wooden handle. This monster is your last resort, the tool you pull out when limbs need removing, before infection kills the patient faster than the cut. The saw never squeals, but the people do. You learn to work fast with it. 2 minutes flat if you want to spare your patient the worst of the pain. If you're slow, well, the screaming gets louder. Now, the clamps. You probably hate them as much as your patients do. These are twisted iron pincers designed to pinch blood vessels closed or hold back muscles so you can see what you're cutting. You wield them like an extension of your hand, but they often slip or pinch the wrong thing, adding to the chaos of your bloody theater. Leeches hang in a small jar nearby. Fresh from the river or the local swamp, they're your most delicate and disgusting weapon. You carry them in a leather pouch, carefully balanced between miraculous cure and horrifying pest. When applied to the skin, they latch on like tiny blood-sucking vampires, drawing out what you believe to be the excess blood causing illness. Sometimes they fall off too soon. Other times, they cling on for hours, making the patient scream in equal parts terror and pain. Your fire iron is an unassuming but terrifying tool, heated in the hearth's flames until it glows red hot. This iron is your cautery. You press it against flesh to burn wounds shut, seal arteries, and sometimes, as a last resort, destroy infected tissue. The smell of burning flesh sticks to your clothes for days afterward, and sometimes you almost wish it would burn away your nightmares too. You glance at the bucket filled with water, bits of cloth, and scraps of moss. You'll dunk your tools here between patients, not because it cleans them, but because the coolness helps dull the edges of dried blood and grime. Sterilization? Forget it. You don't have the luxury. Clean tools mean less infection, but time doesn't allow it. Besides, many believe the pus that clings to wounds is part of the healing process. You know better, but who listens? Your leather apron is cracked and stained. It's your armor against the mess. Beneath it, your clothes are little more than rags soaked with sweat, ale, and the faintest hint of rot. When you grab your tools, you're grabbing weapons for a battle you know you can't fully win. A quick look at the shears reminds you of the day you accidentally nicked a nobleman's ear. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and the man nearly dragged you into the street. Now you take extra care, but accidents still happen. Your hands shake sometimes, whether from exhaustion, fear, or the ale you sneak to steady your nerves. You pick up the smallest knife and inspect its blade. A glint of sunlight catches the edge. You remember the last time you used it to lance a boil the size of a goose egg on a farmer's thigh. The smell of rotting flesh still haunts you. That day, the patient screamed so loudly you swore the church bells answered in sympathy. You glance outside and see a neighbor's child playing near the manure heap. One day, you remind yourself you'll be called to cut off a gangrenous finger or a crushed toe caused by a runaway pig. Welcome to your life. A sudden noise snaps you back. The village priest is shouting from across the street. Bring him! Bring the wounded! You grab your tools, slinging the leather pouch of leeches and your fire iron over your shoulder. No time to clean. No time to pray properly. Every blade and clamp tells a story of pain and survival. You'll use them all today. The shears will trim the tangled hair of a terrified child before you turn your attention to his infected arm. You'll slice through swollen flesh with the medium knife, clamp arteries tight, and use leeches to draw out the poisoned blood. If that fails, you'll reach for the saw. When the saw comes out, the screams crescendo into a roar. You bite your lip to keep from yelling back. Speed is your only friend here. The bone must be cut cleanly and fast, the muscles severed quickly, the stump wrapped in anything you can find to keep the bleeding at bay. There's no anesthetic, no mercy, only you, your tools, and a patient pleading for death or relief, or both. Afterward, you'll clean your tools in the bucket, swearing under your breath as rust stains them and the blood coagulates. You'll rest your aching hands, knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again. These tools are extensions of you, rough, unforgiving, and necessary. They make you feared and needed in equal measure. Your hands hold the power of life and death. Your blades carve the thin line between the two. So you hang your tools back by the window, watch the blood dry, and say a prayer, not to God, but to luck. Because in your world, luck is the sharpest tool you have. Congratulations, you woke up again. The good news? You're still alive. The bad news? So is that festering wound on Johann the miller's leg, and it smells like hell's own backside. You're the barber surgeon, which means you're not just here to cut hair. Today, you're the village's unofficial plague on infection, agony, and screaming. Before you can think about breakfast, spoiler, there isn't any. You've got a patient who needs surgery. Not the kind where you gently dab a bandage and send them home. Number. The kind where you grab your shears, your bone saw, and whatever clean cloth you could scrounge, then hold down a human being while you rip open flesh, like it's a bag of rotten turnips. Sleep? What's that? Last night, you rested your aching bones on your straw mattress, ignoring the fleas biting through your wool blanket like it was a feast. Soap? Forget it. No one here knows what soap is. You scrubbed your hands with sour ale because it smelled the least like death, but it's probably just making things worse. But you're out of time, out of options, and out of patience. Johann is tied to the bench in your dimly lit hut. The priest's face is already pale, the cross clutched tight in his shaking hands. He's about to pass out from the stench, the screams, and maybe the sheer terror of what you're about to do. You've got exactly 3 minutes before the whole operation ends in disaster. Or worse, a fainting priest turning the whole village against you. There's no consent here. You don't ask Johann if he's ready for a scalpel to his leg. In fact, you don't ask anything. Time is short. Pus is rising. Infection is spreading like wildfire under that skin. And you are the only hope between life and death. Sure, you feel bad, but if you stopped to think about it, you might never pick up your knife again. You grip the dull shears in one hand, the bone saw in the other. The tools aren't shiny or new. They're worn, nicked, and sometimes you wonder if they were ever sharp at all. You learned long ago not to ask questions. It's not a hospital. There's no sterilization, no gloves, and definitely no anesthesia. Johann will scream. You will grit your teeth. You slice into the skin. The smell hits you first. Sour sweat, rotting flesh, and something worse. Johann's eyes roll back, but he screams anyway. You hold him down. The village's dirty children press their faces to the wooden shutters watching. They know this is your day's work, and they are both terrified and fascinated. No one has taught you how to make this easier. There's no magic potion, no gentle sedation. Just quick hands, steady nerves, and a prayer that the bleeding stops before the patient dies. Your heart pounds in your chest as you cut through muscle, tendons, and bone. Johann's blood splatters your clothes, mixing with sweat and grime. You don't flinch. You remember what your master taught you. Cut fast, cut clean, cut with God on your side and the devil on your heels. There's wisdom there. If only you could hear it over the screams and smell of death. You saw through the bone with your saw, feeling the rough vibration travel up your arms. Johann's leg thrashed, but the ropes held. Another quick slash, and the leg is free, leaking blood like a broken keg. You grab a strip of linen, wrap it tight, and tie it off with a piece of twine. It's crude, but it might hold. You glance at the clock. 3 minutes, just as you feared. The priest is breathing again, and Johann's whimpering sounds more like a groan of relief. You wipe your hands on your apron, which won't be clean again for months. No follow-up, no antibiotics. You tell Johann to keep it clean, though you know there's no such thing here. The wound will fester, and he'll come back in worse shape. But that's tomorrow's problem. Your next patient will need a tooth pulled without painkillers. After that, maybe you'll squeeze a boil until it bursts. Surgery without sleep, soap, or consent is your reality. It's brutal, messy, and sometimes, despite everything, it works. You sit down, rubbing your aching wrists, and wonder how you got here. You're not a hero. You're barely a doctor. You're a barber-surgeon. A grim mix of barber, butcher, and reluctant healer. And this is only the beginning. Because you're just about to face one of the toughest, bloodiest parts of your profession. Amputation. Yes, as the town's barber-surgeon, you don't just snip hair or pull rotten teeth. Sometimes, you have to take it a step further and cut off a limb, a leg, maybe an arm, depending on how unlucky your patient is. There's no polite way to say it, no gentle procedure. This is medieval Europe. There's no anesthesia, no clean operating theaters. Just you, your rusty saw, and a human being who's terrified beyond words. If you're good, You can get the job done in under 2 minutes. If you're not, well, the patient might not survive, and you'll be hearing about it for months. Amputation is a grim dance between speed and precision, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Why do you have to do this at all? Because if you don't, the rot will set in, and the limb will fester with gangrene. Flesh blackens, swells, and smells like death itself. The patient will waste away slowly and painfully, and the stench will drive everyone around them mad. Broken bones crushed by carts, wounds infected by battle or accident. Someone's got to act fast, and that someone is you. You're not a learned physician with fancy robes or university degrees. You're a barber-surgeon, part haircutter, part butcher, part healer, armed with sharp blades, a bone saw, and a prayer that your patient doesn't bleed out before you can tie off the arteries. Preparation is everything, or at least as much as you can manage in a world without sterile tools or anesthetics. You gather your instruments, a bone saw, sharp knives, leather straps for tourniquets, and a bucket to catch the inevitable flood of blood. Your leather apron is stiff with dried gore. Your hands smell of iron and vinegar, and you don't wear gloves because no one does. Your hands are your tools and your shield, though they shake more often than you'd like. The patient is terrified, eyes wide, sweat pouring down their face. You try to calm them, but it's useless. There's no mercy in this act. A helper, often a grim-faced apprentice or a reluctant relative, holds the patient down. There's no gentleness here, only the promise of pain and the hope that you can make it quick. The method you use is brutal but effective. First, you wrap a tourniquet tightly above the limb, above the knee or elbow, to stop blood flow. The skin turns pale and the toes or fingers go cold. The patient screams, but this is your first line of defense against death by bleeding. Then you slice through the skin with your sharpest knife, cutting a neat circle around the limb. You cut deep through muscle and sinew, trying not to go too far yet. Blood gushes freely. You wipe sweat from your brow with a rag soiled from years of similar work. Next, you work to expose the bone itself, scraping and cutting the muscle away as the patient thrashes and screams prayers and curses alike. You tell them it'll be over soon, but you don't believe it either. Then comes the bone saw, the blunt, rusty instrument you've grown accustomed to, even if it feels more like a butcher's tool than a surgical implement. You saw back and forth with all your strength, teeth catching, jamming, and grinding through bone. The snap, when the bone finally gives way, is a sound that will haunt your dreams. Then, the critical part, tying off the main arteries before the patient bleeds out. Your fingers fumble to find the pulsing cords of blood, wrapping thread or cloth tightly around them. One missed artery, and it's over. Your patient's lifeblood spills onto the floor, and you're left holding a stump and a death sentence. Once the bleeding slows, you pull the skin and muscle back over the stump and sew it shut with heavy thread. You stitch fast, but carefully enough to keep infection at bay, though deep down, you know that infection often wins. You finish and step back, blood dripping from your hands, the patient unconscious or crying out in shock. You clean your tools in whatever water you can find, often stale ale or vinegar, never truly clean, and prepare for the next call. There's no gratitude, only grim faces and whispered rumors that you're cursed or unlucky when your patients don't survive. You keep going because you know that in this cruel time, Amputation is sometimes the only way to save a life. If the saw jams, or if you hesitate too long, the patient's screams rise to a fever pitch, the blood flows faster, and time slips through your fingers. Blood pools on the floor, turning it slick and dangerous. Sometimes your operating space is a muddy battlefield or a cramped, dark hut with rats scrambling in the corners and the smell of rot thick in the air. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just raw survival. You have to be fast, but not careless. 5 minutes too long, and the patient might bleed out, or infection will set in before you can even begin treatment. This is a gamble where every second counts. You don't talk about the times things went wrong, though. When the patient died before you could even tie off the arteries, when the stump turned black with infection, and you had to go back for a second. Even more gruesome cut, when neighbors whispered that you were cursed, or worse, a bringer of death. But you keep going, because the alternative is worse. Watching people rot and die slowly, helpless and hopeless. Somewhere beneath the grime, blood, and despair, you know you are saving lives, even if it's only by tearing off a limb before the rot takes the whole person. You may hate this work, and sometimes it haunts your dreams, but amputation is the brutal heart of your trade. You are the executioner and the healer, wielding your saw in one hand and clutching a prayer in the other. You're not a noble physician who writes scrolls from ivory towers. You're a barber-surgeon with blood on your hands, sweat on your brow, and a trembling heart that still dares to save the living. Tomorrow, you might cut hair or pull a tooth. But today, you are the master of the saw, and you better be fast. It's another day, and you just woke up again in your wooden hut, the wool blanket weighing down on you like a medieval anvil. Your hands ache from yesterday's amputations and tooth extractions. Your bones protest every movement, as if you were a suit of armor long forgotten in a damp castle dungeon. You feel a familiar dull pounding behind your eyes. Your head aches like the clanging church bell outside, louder and more relentless than any alarm clock you'll ever hate. You want relief. You need relief. Fortunately, you have just the cure: bleeding. Because in your world, if something hurts, the obvious answer is you have too much blood. Too much blood? Yes, that's right. The problem, you've been told countless times by scribbled manuscripts, wandering monks, and cantankerous old surgeons, is that excessive blood is behind every headache, fever, and even heartbreak. Your job, your sacred duty, is to release it. Quickly, efficiently, and with just enough cruelty to show you mean business. You don't hesitate. You never do. Your tools are sharp, your technique brutal. You sharpen your lancet, a tiny blade about as sharp as a rat's tooth, and prepare your makeshift basin. This isn't a fancy hospital room. It's a rough wooden table, stained dark with dried blood and mystery fluids, located right next to your spinning wheel, and a pile of old bones. You inspect your patient. Today, that's you. The pounding behind your temples throbs steadily, as if a tiny hammer is tapping your skull in Morse code for pain. Your pulse races. Your cheeks burn with a fever that feels like it's trying to crack your skin open. You grasp your arm and roll up the sleeve. Your veins are visible, bulging like twisted cords beneath pale, grimy skin. You don't flinch. You don't ask questions. You simply find the spot just below your elbow, where the vein throbs strongest. This is where you'll pierce. You prick the vein with your lancet and a few drops of thick, dark blood appear. Good. This is working exactly as it should. You press the blade deeper, making a thin, cruel slit. Blood gushes, hot and heavy, into the basin beneath your arm. This isn't pretty. It's not clean. It smells of iron and fear, and it makes the cats in the corner skitter away. But it's necessary. The bleeding will rid your body of the bad blood, restoring balance to your humors and curing the headache, or so you hope. As the blood flows, you feel dizzy, lightheaded. The world sways like a drunken bard. This is part of the process. If it didn't make you weak, you wouldn't know the bloodletting was working. You let the crimson river run until you're near fainting, or until the basin is almost full of your life force. Sometimes, bleeding cures the headache. Other times, it brings on nausea, cold sweats, or the shaking chills you feel right now. But it's all part of the plan. Your mentors taught you this centuries ago, handed down from the ancient Greeks and Romans, who believed that blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile must remain in perfect balance, or death would follow. But what if the bleeding kills you? That happens, more often than you'd like to admit. Still, no one asks for a refund. This is medieval medicine. You are the closest thing to a doctor most people will see, and they trust you with their lives, even if you don't always deserve it. You wipe the blood from your arm, tying a rough cloth above the wound to slow the flow. Then, the real work begins. You have to explain to your patient, yourself, that the dizziness, the weakness, the pounding chest are signs the cure is working. You might feel worse before you feel better. You might even swear you're dying. But in a few days, that headache will retreat. The fever will break, and the spirits will lift. That's what you tell yourself. That's what you must believe. Bloodletting isn't just for headaches. Oh no. Fevers? Bloodletting. Heartbreak? Bloodletting. Unexplained sadness, bad dreams, or the suspicion that demons are whispering in your ear? You guessed it. Bloodletting. You've bled nobles and peasants alike. The rich believe it's a sign of sophistication when you draw their blood in delicate silver bowls while they recline on velvet cushions. The poor think it's a punishment, but they come anyway, holding a bucket, desperate for relief from the unknown illnesses that plague their bodies. Sometimes you use leeches instead, but they are a luxury. Today, it's just you, your lancet, and the willingness to watch blood pour like a dark river into a basin. You remember one particularly difficult case. A man who came to you convinced his heart was broken from lost love. His wife had left him for a wealthier merchant, and his grief had turned to a fever. You bled him. A lot. You sliced his arm open and let the blood flow like a river for what seemed like hours. He swore he felt lighter afterward, though you're not sure if it was the blood loss or just the pity. You don't ask questions about heartbreak. It's not your job. You're a barber and a surgeon, but you're not a counselor. Your job is to cut, bleed, pull, and sew. You are a tool in the grand machinery of medieval life. Sometimes a sharp one. You think about the risks. Bloodletting can cause fainting, infection, or death. You've seen patients slump unconscious mid-bleed, never to wake again. but no one blames you. No one can say the cure was worse than the disease, because back then, the disease was the curse. The day drags on. You bleed another patient with a raging fever and a young woman complaining of a terrible headache. You make your cuts swiftly, the blood flowing like a river in a storm. You remind them to rest, to drink weak ale or herbal teas, and to avoid heavy labor. You finish the last patient and clean your tools, your lancet glistening, the basin rinsed with vinegar, the cloth stained and discarded. You wash your hands in cold water and stare at your reflection in a cracked, soot-covered mirror. You look tired. You look like the weight of 1,000 bleeding arms rests on your shoulders. And yet, you are alive. You are the barber-surgeon, the man who wakes up with scissors and a prayer and ends the day drenched in blood. Tomorrow, you will do it all again. You've just been told, in hushed, horrified tones, that someone nearby has a boil the size of a goose egg. The news spreads like wildfire because boils are nobody's friend in 1325. They're painful, stinky, and if left alone, they fester into a bloody mess nobody wants to touch. And guess what? You're the only one who will touch it. Your job? To lance that boil open and drain the filth inside. Easy, right? Ha! If only. Boil lancing is one of the most popular treatments in your grim repertoire, but also one of the nastiest, most gut-wrenching, and soul-shattering. Your tools are simple. A sharp, crooked knife stained from decades of use, a rusty pin for poking, a rag that's been through more bloodbaths than you can count, and a bucket ready to catch whatever explodes from the wound. No gloves, no antiseptic, just you, your shaky hands, and the unspoken prayers that you don't lose a finger this time. The patient arrives in your hut, wincing and dragging 1 foot behind, feverish and covered in sweat. The boil is grotesque, a swollen, angry bubble of infection that pulsates beneath the skin like a living thing. You lean in close. The smell hits you first. Rotten meat, sour sweat, and something else. Decay. The smell of death's doorstep. You start with a ritual. Well, as close as you get to one. A quick blessing under your breath, and then you dip the blade in hot oil, both to sterilize and to dull the patient's anticipation. You hand the bucket to the shaking assistant, if you're lucky enough to have one, and grip the skin around the boil. The first cut is the worst. The skin breaks with a wet pop, and suddenly, a thick stream of yellow pus gushes out. It smells worse than the latrine, worse than the stable after a rainstorm. It smells like all the sins of the world rolled into one and dumped right in your face. Your patient screams like the end of days. You hold them down. There's no anesthesia. There's no mercy. Just you and the boiling pit of human misery under your knife. You scoop out the gunk, scraping the flesh to stop the infection from spreading deeper. Because if you don't, that nasty poison will seep into the bloodstream, and death will come knocking. The boil bleeds. It weeps. You pull out clumps of dead skin and more pus until the swelling shrinks and the skin looks a little less like a war zone. You're working fast, sweat dripping down your forehead, staining your already filthy tunic. The patient's fever hasn't broken yet. Their skin is clammy, eyes glazed over. But you keep going because it's your job to heal or to hold the pain, long enough for the body to fight back. Once the worst is out, you take a rag soaked in wine, because it's all you have, and press it on the wound. Wine is your antiseptic, your magic potion, and the only thing that stands between infection and death. Then, you bandage it up with a strip of linen, hoping it won't get worse overnight. Your patient stumbles out, clutching their side, half grateful, half ready to curse you. You've saved them from the boil's worst, but they'll be back in days if they don't keep it clean. Which, in this world, means avoiding dirt, rats, and other people who look like they've been through hell and back. You sit down heavily and wipe your blade on your sleeve. You can feel the weight of every boil you've lanced piling up on your soul like wet stones. You try not to think about the last one, where the pus was so thick you almost gagged, or the time you nearly cut your own finger when the patient jerked awake. No time for squeamishness here. The worst part? Boils are everywhere. They come from poor hygiene, bad water, and diets so rotten even the rats avoid your village. Every town, every hamlet has them, and every patient will come to you, the barber-surgeon, because only you have the guts and the tools. In the meantime, rumors swirl. Some say boils are a curse, punishment for sins. Others whisper that it's the devil's work, or a sign you're about to die. You don't have the luxury of belief. You have to lance and pray and do it again tomorrow. You glance at your reflection in a cracked wooden bowl. Your face is pale, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights, and the smell of blood that clings to your skin. You're not sure if you're healer or butcher anymore. Probably both. Probably neither. No one celebrates boil lancing. It's not a heroic task. No one throws coins your way, yet it's what keeps people alive. Just barely. Tonight, you'll sleep fitfully, knowing tomorrow will bring more boils, more screaming, and the same grim dance with infection and pain. You clutch your shears close, not just for haircuts, but because they remind you you're still alive. And if you're lucky, that'll be enough. You've made it through another morning of scraping muck off your shears and muttering prayers to whichever saint might spare your hands from trembling. Now it's time for your favorite part of the day, tooth pulling in the town square. Yes, you heard that right. Your clinic is a plank nailed between two barrels, set up in the bustling heart of the market where everyone can watch and, most importantly, scream. There's no cozy chair here. No please relax or soothing music. You sit your patient on a hard wooden bench, which is basically a medieval torture device, and get ready to make the town's collective ears bleed. You don't numb. There's no magic potion, no cold spray, no fancy anesthesia. No one has invented the idea of comfort yet. You just grab your tools, your trusty, rusty, gleaming torture devices, and get to work. Your main weapon? A pair of pliers that have seen more tooth extractions than any priest has seen confessions. They're heavy and grimy, their iron handles slick with the sweat and blood of centuries. They don't get cleaned the way modern dentists would dream of. They get wiped on your leather apron or dipped in whatever vinegar you can find, which might as well be dragon spit for all the good it does. Your patient? It's always someone desperate enough to sit on your plank in the middle of a crowded square. A farmer with a tooth that's been aching since last harvest, a merchant's daughter who grimaces every time she bites bread, or a scruffy child too scared to cry. but shaking all the same. You grip the chair's arm, steady the poor soul's head, and reach into their mouth. Teeth in medieval Europe crack like walnuts, thanks to diets of coarse bread, unwashed vegetables, and enough grit to sand down an oak table. Decayed molars are blackened and soft, roots rotted to mush. But that doesn't mean they come out easy. You clamp the pliers around the offending tooth. It's loose, but not loose enough. You wiggle. You twist. The patient's eyes water. Some try to bite down, but you wedge wooden sticks between their jaws to keep them open. Because you're no fool. The first pull is a test of wills. You yank hard. The tooth resists. Blood wells up. The crowd starts gathering. Oh yes, it's showtime. Villagers pause their business, and the street vendors hush for the most anticipated spectacle of the day. Hold still, you bark. The tooth cracks. The patient screams like a banshee, spitting blood that sprays like a fountain onto the dirt street. Kids cheer, women gasp, and the town drunk cheers too loudly. You pull harder. The root finally gives way with a sickening pop. You hold up the prize, a bloody, jagged shard of enamel that once held stories of every bite and curse it endured. The patient clutches their cheek, tears mingling with dirt and spit. You slap a rag soaked in vinegar on the bleeding gum and toss the tooth into a bucket already filled with dozens of other trophies. And then it's on to the next. The rhythm is brutal, relentless. Grab, yank, scream, repeat. Sometimes you pull 2 teeth in one sitting. A brave few try to negotiate, offering chickens or coins for mercy. You don't give it. Mercy's for monks, not barber surgeons. Tooth pulling is not just a medical procedure. It's a public event, a form of entertainment. People gather to watch because it's a rare spectacle of pain and survival. In a world where most of life is hidden behind walls and dirt, this raw display of human suffering somehow feels normal, even necessary. You learn to tune out the screams, their background noise, like the clanging of the blacksmith's hammer or the bleating of goats. You're focused on one thing, getting that tooth out before the patient bites through their own tongue or faints from shock. There is no painkiller, but there is ale. You might slip your patient a small cup beforehand, a token peace offering to dull the edge of terror. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it just makes them dizzy enough to pass out midway, which is a mixed blessing. If a tooth breaks instead of coming out whole, common, you curse under your breath and go back to wiggling at the stubborn root. Occasionally, you have to use a smaller, sharper tool to dig around the edges, scraping away the gum, like you're mining for gold. It's a delicate dance between success and disaster, because a broken root left inside the jaw means infection, and infections are often fatal. You don't have the luxury of sterility. Your hands, your tools, the bench, none of it is clean by today's standards. But what's clean? Dirt is just a fact of life. Blood mixes with dust and sweat to make a paste that coats your leather apron and turns your shears a dull red. And the risk? It's everywhere. A careless slip, and you nick the cheek or tongue. The patient might scream louder, maybe bite their tongue off, or worse, start shaking with fever days later when the wound festers. You keep an eye on every twitch, every whimper, every quickening breath. Once the deed is done, you hand out rags and bark instructions. Keep it clean with vinegar and breadcrumbs. Come back if it swells. Don't eat hard things for a week, or you'll be back here. Most don't follow the instructions. They have no choice but to return when the pain comes back, worse than before. You clean your tools by dipping them in a bucket of stale beer. Better than nothing. You wipe your hands on your apron, ignoring the gritty feeling under your nails. You're a barber surgeon, not a saint. By the end of the day, your hands are stained red, your lungs full of dust and faint hints of rotting flesh. Your ears ring from the day's screams, and your throat is dry from shouting over the market. You pack your tools away, feeling the aches in your knuckles and wrists that come from wrenching teeth from stubborn jaws. You're tired, but alive. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, you'll wake up, sharpen your shears, and do it all again. Because in 1325, this is what it means to be a barber surgeon. A harvester of teeth, a healer without mercy, a spectacle for the townsfolk, and, if you're lucky, a survivor. You might not save lives with every pull, but you damn well keep the townsfolk biting a little less painfully. And in a world that smells like death and desperation, that's something. Let's be honest. Physicians and barber surgeons are worlds apart. They wear robes, look down their noses, and boast degrees that cost a fortune and years of study. You wear a leather apron, carry bone saws, leech jars, razors, and sometimes a bucket for blood and pus. Your workspace smells of sweat, alcohol, and sometimes death. No lecture halls for you. Just dirt floors and the occasional screaming patient. Physicians are the aristocrats of medicine, but for all their fancy titles and flowery words about humors, they rarely touch a body. They diagnose illnesses from a safe distance, mostly from books and prayers. Your job? You're the hands-on guy. You treat wounds, pull teeth, and saw off limbs. When a man loses his arm in battle, it's you who gets called, not the guy with the diploma. Why the divide? Social class. Physicians came from wealthy families and went to university, if you were lucky enough to be born into one. Barber surgeons were tradesmen. You learned by apprenticeship, by watching, by trial and error. Your education was more stab here, see what happens, then analyze the four humors and balance the bodily fluids. When the Black Death swept through Europe, physicians had their books and prayers. You had your blades and your leeches. Who do you think saw more action? Who held more lives in their hands, literally and figuratively? It was you. You were in the trenches, wiping sweat from your brow as you cut, cauterized, and prayed a prayer you made up on the spot. Doctors would mock your lack of formal education. They called you barber with a sneer, ignoring the fact that your hands saved countless peasants, soldiers, and even nobles who'd rather face amputation than rot slowly from infection. Their robes didn't protect them from the plague or from the screams you heard every day. They wore silk. You wore grime. They carried scrolls. You carried blood-stained knives. They preached theory. You delivered reality. The barber pole, red and white spiraling stripes, was your symbol, but it wasn't a badge of honor. It was a warning. Here lives a man who bleeds you, shaves you, and might accidentally kill you. The red represented the blood you spilled. The white, the bandages you wrapped tight afterward. It was a spinning flag that shouted, "Enter if you dare." physicians sat inside ivory towers, poring over texts in Latin. You worked outside, in market squares, fields, and filthy huts. If a knight rode into town with an arrow sticking out of his thigh, it was you who grabbed the saw and the ale to dull the pain. Not the physician, who might be too busy counting his coins or debating whether the patient's humors were excessively choleric. Sometimes they treated the rich and left you the scraps. But those scraps weren't just leftovers. They were the sick, the wounded, the desperate. You were the last hope for peasants, the outcasts, the unlucky. And when the plague hit, both you and the doctors were overwhelmed. But you were out there, lancing buboes, stitching wounds, and trying to hold back death with nothing but your tools and grim determination. Physicians dismissed you as dirty and uneducated, but they had little real power to heal. Their prescriptions often included bleeding and purging, which made patients worse. You knew the value of cauterizing a wound or amputating a gangrenous limb. You might not have had fancy degrees, but you understood the grim calculus of survival. Your education? Mostly on the job. You learned to recognize infection by the smell of pus and the look of rotten flesh. You learned to hold a patient down when the screaming got too loud. You learned which herbs might dull pain and which poultices might fight infection, or at least keep the flies away. There was no university for that, just scars, sweat, and a stubborn will to keep people alive. You were the gritty underdog in a world obsessed with class and ceremony. The barber-surgeon was the man who cleaned the streets of blood and bone, the man who sat with dying men and offered what comfort he could. You might not have had a degree, but you had guts, literally. And let's be clear, you didn't just cut hair and shave beards. Your chair was often the only operating table for miles. You set broken bones with little more than rope and guesswork. You pulled rotten teeth with whatever force it took. You pulled splinters, drained abscesses, and did your best to make it all less painful. You washed your hands in what passed for clean water, rare, cold, and probably full of who knows what. You could never be truly clean, not with the grime of the streets clinging to your skin and the smell of blood and sweat baked into your clothes. You smelled of death. And so did your tools. That was the price of your trade. And yet, patients came back. The sick came to you when the physician's remedies failed. Because despite your lack of titles, you offered something they couldn't: action. If you had a blade and a bucket, you could stop bleeding, remove poison, and sometimes save a life. In a world where most people lived in constant pain and danger, you were the guy who did what needed doing, no matter how grim or gruesome. You were a healer of sorts, though many would never call you that. You were a butcher, a barber, a surgeon, a survivor. So yes, the physicians had their robes, their scrolls, and their social standing. But you had the blood on your hands and the scars to prove it. You lived the harsh reality of medieval medicine every day. And if that wasn't enough, you did it all, knowing that the world thought you were lowly and unclean. You stare out your tiny window, the medieval equivalent of a TV screen, at the grim morning fog curling around the village. Soon, you'll be face to face with your first patient, a young man whose head is pounding so hard he can barely see straight. The town healer says the boy is possessed by spirits or cursed by a witch. Your job? Open the head, let the demons fly out, and hope the kid doesn't bleed to death. Let's get real for a moment. Trepanation sounds brutal, because it is. You're not just shaving hair or pulling teeth here. You're slicing through scalp, scraping away bone, and exposing the squishy, fragile brain beneath. You don't have anesthesia, just a bucket of ale to calm the nerves. The patient's screams will echo in your ears for days. You set your tools out on a splintered wooden table, tools stained with blood and rust, polished only by the hope of doing your best. The trephine looks like a tiny circular saw with a handle. In your hands, it feels both like a tool of healing and a weapon of fate. The line between surgeon and executioner is thinner than the bone you're about to cut. You wrap a leather strap around the patient's head to hold it still. His eyes are wide, pleading for mercy. But you know mercy comes after survival, not before. You make the first incision in the scalp, a curved, jagged line that will bleed like hell. You push aside the skin and muscle until the skull is bare, shiny, and cruelly hard. Now comes the worst part. You place the trephine's blade against the skull and start turning the crank. It squeals against bone like a banshee. Dust and bone shavings fly everywhere. The patient howls, tries to move, but your assistants hold him down. If you hesitate, the blade might slip and cut into the brain, a death sentence. If you go too fast, you risk breaking the skull into pieces. One wrong move and it's all over. Medieval medicine is equal parts luck and stubbornness. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, you cut a perfect circular flap in the skull, lifting it like a lid. Beneath is the pale, pulsating brain. You touch it lightly with the tip of your knife, just to make sure the spirits can leave. You jab at the exposed dura mater, the thin membrane covering the brain, to release whatever pressure or evil might be trapped inside. The patient's screams soften to groans, and you hope that means the pain is easing. You clean the wound with wine, because it's the closest thing to antiseptic, and cover the hole with cloth soaked in herbal poultices. You know the hole won't close properly for months. An infection is just a breath away. But right now, the boy is alive. You lean back and catch your breath. You don't think about the fact that people call you a butcher. You're a healer, a miracle worker in a world where miracles are rare. The history of trepanation is older than you, older than the kings and the church. People have been drilling into skulls for thousands of years. Egyptians, Greeks, even the tribes that live beyond the forests. Some believe it opens a portal to the gods. Others say it's to let out demons. You don't care about their theories. You care about whether the patient lives to see tomorrow. You've seen cases where trepanation saved lives. A man with a cracked skull who stopped bleeding after you opened the bone. A child with seizures who became quieter after you drilled the hole. But you've also seen those who died from the surgery itself. The ones whose brains swelled, who got infections so bad the village smelled of rot for days. You wonder how many of your patients leave your care worse off than when they arrived. But in this time, with no antibiotics, no sterile gloves, and no modern tools, every day you do your job is a gamble with death. You remember your master's words. If you save one life with trepanation, you save a soul. If you kill one, you send it straight to hell. Choose your hands wisely. Your hands shake slightly as you prepare to close the wound. No stitches, just strips of linen and prayer. The cloth will fall off in a day or two, exposing the hole again. You've seen some patients cover the wound with leather patches or even metal plates fashioned by the local blacksmith. But those are rare luxuries. You clean your tools with wine and vinegar, wiping the blood away as best you can. Tomorrow, you'll do it all over again for someone else with a fever, a headache, or the belief that something unnatural is trapped inside their head. You go to bed exhausted, your ears still ringing with the screams and the wet sounds of flesh being cut. Sleep comes fitfully, haunted by the faces of those you could not save. And yet, you wake up the next morning, sharpen your blade, and prepare to drill into another skull. Because that's what a medieval barber-surgeon does. You hold the line between life and death, madness and sanity, hope and despair. One painful turn of the trephine at a time. You've survived the morning, barely, and now the real fun begins. A villager stumbles into your clinic, clutching his arm, pale as a ghost, sweat dripping down his forehead. You know exactly what's wrong. He's broken it, and you're the one who's going to fix it. No x-rays, no clean hospital beds, no fancy splints made from molded plastic or gentle foam padding. Just you, your gut instinct, and a bucket of lukewarm water that might or might not be clean. In fact, it's probably not. But it's what you've got. The broken bone snaps and cracks in ways you didn't know a human body could manage, until you've been forced to hear the sickening sound firsthand. You try not to gag when you catch the scent of old blood mixed with sweat and something sour. Maybe the smell of the man's fear. Probably your own. You swallow your nausea and remember, you're the barber-surgeon, the closest thing the town has to a bone doctor. When a limb breaks in medieval times, it's not just about setting the bone, it's a full body experience. Pain, terror, the desperate hope you won't mess it up so badly the poor soul dies before morning. You ask the man how it happened. A fall from a cart, a tussle with a drunk, something silly, but you've heard all the excuses before. Doesn't matter how it broke, it matters how you fix it. Your tools for this job are humble. A wooden splint, some strips of cloth, and a sturdy stick to use as a lever if things get really bad. You've sharpened your eye for how bones lie and how they should lie. But this isn't science. It's guesswork, trial, error, and a prayer to whichever saint is listening. You gently remove the man's tunic, revealing a forearm that looks like a twisted knot of branches, puffed up, bruised purple and blue, strangely bent in all the wrong directions. You hesitate for a moment. This is the part no one warns you about. The crack, snap, and sometimes the scream that follows when you force the bones back into place. You brace yourself. With careful hands, you begin. You grip his arm firmly and press. You twist the broken pieces slowly, bending the flesh and muscles, trying to coax the bones to realign. His face contorts in agony. His eyes squeeze shut. He curses in the local dialect, and you wonder if you'd scream too if you were him. Then, a sudden, sickening snap. You hold your breath. His arm shifts awkwardly. You've said it wrong. You try again. Snap. Another wrong move. You feel a stab of guilt. What if you've made it worse? What if he never regains the use of this arm? But there's no one else to do it. The local doctor won't touch broken bones without his fancy Latin books, and the priest only blesses but never treats. You're it. You wrap the arm tightly with strips of cloth, rags scavenged from old clothes, and bind the wooden splint around it, trying to immobilize what you just mangled. Your fingers tremble, but you hide it well. The man's breathing is shallow. Sweat beads on his forehead. His teeth are clenched so hard you swear you can hear them grind. You step back. "Rest," you say. He nods weakly. You know the splint won't hold perfectly. The arm will swell. Infection might set in. He might lose feeling in his fingers. But for now, he's alive. Next up, broken ribs. No easy task. A young farmer is slumped against the wall, gasping for air. He says he fell off a horse, landed on his side. You can see the bruising spreading like ink under paper. Broken ribs in the 14th century mean one thing: pain, pain, and more pain. You have no painkillers. You have no morphine. The best you can offer is a stiff dose of ale and a prayer. But you know you have to help. You instruct him to wrap tightly with a length of cloth to hold the ribs together. Not too tight, or he'll suffocate. Not too loose, or the ribs will puncture a lung. You wrap and wrap, sweat pouring down your brow, while the farmer grits his teeth and swears he's going to die. You know he might. Many do. The truth? You set broken bones knowing that some will never heal properly. Some will fester with infection. Some will trap nerves or cause lifelong pain. But you also know you've saved lives today. Without you, the man with the broken arm would have bled out or died from shock. The farmer might have collapsed into pneumonia by nightfall. This is your grim victory. Sometimes, when the light fades and the ale runs low, you think about the bones you couldn't fix. The ones that snapped too badly, that twisted into grotesque shapes no splint could straighten. The ones where the patient screamed so loud you heard it across the village square. You wonder if you did enough. But there's no time for doubt. Tomorrow will bring more broken limbs, more sharp pain, more desperate faces looking to you for a miracle. You grind your teeth, wash your hands in a bucket of cold water, and ready your tools. The splinters, the saw, the knives, your instruments of mercy and torture. You don't have a choice. You break it, you set it, and you pray you don't hear the wrong crack. But now comes the real horror. The part they don't sing songs about. The part that smells of blood, bile, and something far worse: fear. You're the barber-surgeon, which means today your clinic is a field soaked with mud, gore, and the groans of the dying. The sun is dipping low, casting a golden glow across shattered helms, snapped arrows, and the twisted remains of men who once had names, wives, and teeth. Some are calling for their mothers. Some just gurgle. This is your hospital. There is no marble floor, no brass tools gleaming on silver trays. You've got a knife with a handle that's seen better decades, a saw with 3 teeth missing, and hands so dirty they could be mistaken for gloves. Clean water? Ha! The last bucket was used to rinse off a sergeant's entrails and then knocked over by a half-dead horse. You step over a man whose insides are on the outside. He's still blinking at the sky. That means he's not your priority. Not yet. He doesn't have the luxury of being saved. Not when there are others you might drag back from the brink. You find your first case slumped against a cart. The cart used to carry hay. Now it carries thighs and ribs and someone's arm, which might be his. He's holding pressure to his stomach, but it's not working. His guts are spilling out like overcooked pudding. You kneel, ignoring the cold mud that soaks through your knees. Easy, you mutter, as if anything is ever easy now. You reach into your pouch for your needle, made of pig bone, thick as a child's finger, and your waxed thread. You don't wash them. There's nothing to wash them with. You wipe them on your sleeve, which is already soaked through with 3 men's blood, and hope that's enough. The stitching begins. He screams like a kettle. Good, you say. You're still alive. You don't flinch when he thrashes. You've been kicked in the face by a night-spurred boot before. You've had a man bite your wrist so hard you wore his teeth prints for a week. Pain is part of the process, for them and for you. You've stopped trying to apologize. The wound oozes something yellow. You try not to think about it. You pack it with moss. You pray it's the kind that doesn't kill. Some moss helps wounds. Some moss rots them. You can't always tell in the dark. And the dark is coming. You finish tying the knot and smear a salve made of lard, ash, and whatever herbs the apothecary didn't sell to the priest. Will it help? Who knows? It smells strong enough to kill fleas, which is all you can ask for. You move on. Another soldier is gasping through a punctured lung. There's an arrow lodged between 2 ribs, the fletching fluttering as he breathes. You could pull it out. But then what? Plug the hole with your thumb? You pat his shoulder and walk away. Triage is cruel, but necessary. The next patient is more promising, or at least still screaming. That's always a good sign. A sword caught him in the thigh. It didn't go clean through. It carved a chunk, a nasty one. You can see bone, but he isn't gut-shot, and his face isn't gray yet. He has a chance. You slap on a belt as a tourniquet, tight enough that he howls, tight enough to keep him from bleeding out. You clean the wound the only way you can, with wine. Expensive? Yes. Effective? Debatable. But it's all you have. The sting means it's working. Or at least it distracts him while you sharpen your blade on a rock. He begs you not to cut. You do it anyway. The slice is quick, cleaner than most. You carve away the loose flesh, the stuff already turning green. You can't afford to be gentle. Infection loves ragged edges. You cauterize the wound with a red-hot iron pulled from the campfire. The smell is unforgettable. Burning pork. Only it's not pork. You press the iron down and hold until he passes out. Mercy, in a way. By now, your hands are shaking, but not from fear. Just cold. The wind has picked up. The torchlight flickers. You're sweating under your robe, but your fingers are numb. You can't feel your knuckles anymore. Just the wet stickiness of other men's blood between them. You move again. Some soldiers are already dead, but their friends haven't realized yet. You see them cradling lifeless heads, murmuring words you'll never hear. You give them their moment, then you drag the corpses away. Flies are arriving. So are crows. The smell is unbearable now, like iron and rot and bad soup. But you stopped noticing smells months ago, back when you performed surgery next to a latrine and didn't flinch. A knight is laid out on a cloak, his armor half ripped from his body. Someone tried to treat him, poorly. His leg is bandaged with a banner. You unwrap it. It's worse than you thought. Bone is poking through the flesh. The blood is black. He's unconscious. Maybe that's a blessing. You make the decision. The saw is dull. You try to sharpen it, but It barely helps. Still, it goes through the bone eventually. Not cleanly, not easily, but it goes through. The sound it makes stays with you, like someone gnawing on a stick, only wetter. You toss the limb aside and cauterize the stump. He doesn't scream. He might never wake up, but he's still breathing. You move again and again. By the time the moon is high, your hands are raw. Your apron is stiff with blood. You've stitched over 30 men, lost half. Some will die tomorrow. Some will wish they had. You whisper a few words over each. Not prayers, not really, just sounds. You don't believe in much anymore, but you believe in the knife. It's the only honest thing left. When the last groan fades and the field is quiet, you sit, just for a moment. The mud squelches beneath you. Your back aches like a rusted hinge. Your breath smells of rot and herbs. You haven't eaten since yesterday. You don't remember what day it is. You watch the stars and wonder if they ever look down. Somewhere, in a cleaner world, a physician holds a silver scalpel. But here, in the blood-drenched fields of 1325, your blade is iron, your heart is lead, and your job is never done. Because war doesn't end when the sword stops swinging. Not for the barber-surgeon. Not for you. But, in case you forgot, you're not just a medieval barber-surgeon. You're also a part-time apothecary, freelance philosopher, an unwilling participant in what modern scholars might politely call medically sanctioned cannibalism. You wake up, your blanket crusty with dried sweat and yesterday's gore. Your fingers are stained brown from herbs, pus, and something else you'd rather not examine. The fire is out again. Your joints feel like they've been pickled overnight in a vinegar barrel. And as your eyes creak open, you remember what's on today's agenda. Repacking the powdered skulls. You shuffle to your workbench, stepping over a pile of dirty rags and a chicken that's been squatting in your corner since Candlemas. Your tools glint faintly in the half-light. A razor, a bone saw, a rusted lancet, and a pestle caked with something that was definitely once a person. Maybe noble. Maybe thief. It doesn't matter. Dead is dead. And dead is useful. You grab a pouch labeled cranium pulvis, skull powder. You're not sure whose head it came from, and frankly, no one ever asks. The best ones come from the gallows, still warm. You heard a rumor once that a fresh skull ground while the soul is still half attached works better for epilepsy. You've never seen that proven, but people swear by it. You nod and say, "Aye, the warmth helps." Because what else can you say? In your world, medicine is part science, part theater, and part grave robbery. Need a cure for the king's evil? A bit of dried blood and wine? Bloody nose that won't stop? You prescribe powdered mummy, yes, literal Egyptian mummies, crushed like spices in a mortar and spooned out like cinnamon. It's imported, expensive, and wildly popular. The richer the client, the more enthusiastic the belief, especially if the mummy comes with a little papyrus label. Authenticity sells. The irony? You've never been further than 6 miles from your own muddy town, but somehow you're distributing pharaohs by the pound. You reach for the dried human fat next. It's lard-like, vaguely yellow, and smells like an old candle left in a crypt. It's believed to be good for bruises and bone aches. You mix it with crushed rose petals and vinegar. It doesn't help. Not really. But it spreads easily. and smells slightly less like death if you close your nose and your soul. Sometimes you wonder, how much of this is real? But then someone's child stops shaking, or a nobleman's rash fades, and they hand you silver, and you nod, you smile, you thank the Virgin. You don't mention that half the medicinal mummy in circulation is probably just dried beggars from the plague pits. You were trained to cut hair and open veins. No one taught you about the ethics of corpse medicine. In fact, ethics don't come up much. You remember the first time you helped render a skull into dust. It was your master's idea. The body had barely cooled when he handed you the chisel and said, "Strike while it's fresh." The soul's still listening. You were 17, and you didn't sleep that night. Now you sleep fine. Or at least you would, if not for the dreams. You break for lunch. A lump of barley bread and a bowl of broth that may or may not contain rat. You chew, staring blankly at the table where your jars rest. There's one labeled Muscus humanus, human musk. It's scraped from the armpits of executed criminals. Allegedly calms hysteria and soothes the humors. No one questions it. Why would they? This is the 14th century. The line between medicine and magic is thinner than your best suture thread. And speaking of magic, you're expected to know that too. Clients bring you charms and prayers. One noblewoman insisted that her son's seizures were the result of a spirit living in his spine. You sold her powdered saint's bone, actually just parsnip with a little candle soot, and told her to mix it with milk under the moonlight. It worked. Or maybe he just grew out of it. Who knows? But you're not just a fraud. Number you also stitch wounds, set bones, pull teeth, and lance boils big enough to need their own baptism. You've seen intestines spill out and eyes roll back. You've whispered prayers while pressing hot iron to someone's belly. You've held a screaming man down while another bit into leather and begged for his wife. And sometimes you do save them. But then you turn around and sell corpse dust to a nun who believes it helps her insomnia. You once boiled a thief's hand, sliced the fingers off, and turned it into a hand of glory, supposed to unlock doors and keep spirits at bay. Mostly, it just terrified drunks and got you chased out of town. You don't believe everything you sell, but you believe in survival, because if you don't sell it, someone else will. And they'll get paid, maybe even praised. Besides, the church says relics heal. If a splinter from the true cross can cure a tumor, why not a little powdered brain? You wipe your hands on your apron. The blood has dried into stiff patches. You can barely remember the original color anymore. The door creaks open. Another patient, pale, trembling, smelling like fear and mildew. She holds a coin in one hand and her child in the other. The boy has a fever. You can see it in the eyes. You don't know if human fat will help, but you mix a little powder, whisper something that sounds sacred, and tell her it's rare. She believes you. She walks out, clutching the jar like it's hope itself. You stand in the doorway for a moment, watching the muddy street, the horses plodding by, the rats, the rain, the endless ache of existence. And you wonder, not for the first time, if you've become more priest than physician. It's well past midnight in the year 1348, and you're wide awake. Not because you want to be, but because someone just kicked your door off its hinges screaming about a gut wound and a miracle. Again. You'd hoped for 3 uninterrupted hours of sleep, maybe 4 if God was feeling generous. But no. Someone's cousin slipped with an axe after a mead-soaked brawl behind the alehouse, and now he's bleeding like a slaughtered pig in your doorway. Perfect. You grab your tools, not because you're confident. No, those days are long gone, but because there's no one else. The local priest might say a few words over the dying man, but when it comes to blood, pain, and guts, it's you or nobody. You're the barber-surgeon. Half healer, half butcher, all desperation. Your tools aren't in a sleek black case with velvet lining. They're rattling around in a wooden box that smells like old ale and dried pus. There's a saw in there, a curved knife, forceps, if you're lucky, a cautery iron if the fire's still hot. Oh, and a rusty needle with gut thread if you need to stitch something back into place. And light? Forget it. The candles are stubs. The rushlight smokes like it resents you. Someone holds a sputtering torch just above your patient's belly, which smells faintly of onions, blood, and doom. You squint, pray, and hope the rats in the corner don't try to steal a toe. The patient's already babbling. Something about Saint Sebastian. His hands are clenched so tight they're white as snow. He's shaking, which makes things inconvenient, especially when you need to make a clean cut. Be still, you hiss, not because it'll help, but because you need something to say besides screaming. Your breath fogs in the cold night air as you kneel beside him. His tunic is soaked with blood. You peel it back and wince. The gash is deep, not clean, ragged like a wolf's bite. There's fat, there's muscle, there's too much. He sobs. You can't tell if it's from pain or fear. Probably both. Will I live? He asks. You lie. Yes. You don't know, but it's your job to try, or at least make it look like you're trying. There's no anesthetic. Laudanum exists, yes, but not for people like him. Or like you. You reach for the leather strap and shove it into his mouth. Bite down, you say. Hard. He does. You don't blame him. The first cut is fast. You've learned that much. Hesitation leads to screaming. More blood, less time. You slice along the edge of the wound to widen it. More blood gushes out, and you mutter a prayer you only half remember. A rat scurries across the far side of the room. You ignore it. You're elbow deep in a man's gut and can't afford to worry about four-legged spectators. Besides, it's not the worst company you've had. Your assistant, usually a boy of 12 with a weak stomach and shaky hands, holds the torch higher. The shadow of your arm dances on the wall behind you, like something out of a fever dream. The air smells of sweat, tallow, and bile. You reach inside, find the source of the bleeding, press pack it with linen if you have any left. The patient screams into the strap, eyes wide. You hope he doesn't pass out, not because it's easier if he's conscious, just because. You've seen too many go quiet and never wake up. You cauterize the edge of the wound. The iron hisses when it touches flesh, and the room fills with the stench of burning meat. You try not to gag. The smell gets into your clothes, into your hair, into your soul. You've been doing this for years, but it never stops being horrible. There's shouting outside, probably another drunk, or maybe a neighbor demanding to know why you're screaming bloody murder in the middle of the night. You ignore it. Focus. You only have a few minutes before the bleeding starts again, or before he dies. You stitch, clumsy, fast, like darning a hole in a sock, except if you get it wrong, someone dies. The gut thread pulls tight, the wound puckers. You hope that's good. You don't know anymore. You've read a few scraps from Galen, seen a monk sketch some diagrams once, but most of your training came from watching an old man butcher pigs in the market. You pour wine on the wound. It stings. He screams again. You slap a wad of cloth on top and wrap it in a bandage that used to be part of your own tunic. You tie it tight. You sit back. Your hands are shaking. You glance at the boy holding the torch. He looks pale, like he might faint. "Don't drop that," you say. "I still need to clean the knife." The patient is breathing. Shallow, but breathing. You've done all you can. Whether he lives or dies now is up to God, the fleas, and whatever bacteria decided to tag along tonight. Probably not in that order. You wash your hands in a bowl of cold water that turns red instantly. There's no soap. Not really. Just ash and hope. You wipe your tools down with a scrap of cloth that's seen too many wounds already. If you're lucky, you won't nick yourself and die of infection by week's end. You're exhausted. Your back aches. Your knees throb. You're 28, but feel 80. You lie back against the wall and listen to the fire crackle. Someone outside starts singing a hymn off-key. Maybe the world isn't ending tonight, after all. Then there's a knock at the door. You close your eyes. Not again. And now, the sad news is, you've got the plague. Don't act surprised. You've been poking infected lumps with a rusty knife for the past 3 weeks. You've lanced so many buboes. Your hands shake when you look at a turnip. You tried to be careful, but the concept of protective gear in 1348 is, well, non-existent. No gloves, no mask. Just your apron, a grim frown, and whatever prayers your grandmother remembered before she died coughing. You wake up with your face stuck to the dirt floor. Again. The straw mattress gave up last week, and now it's mostly a flattened pile of itch and regret. You sit up. Your back screams. Your knees crack. Something inside your armpit hurts in a way that feels familiar. Too familiar. You've seen this before, on everyone else. The warmth, the ache, the way your skin has gone strangely purple. You pull back your tunic and, yep, there it is. A bulge, angry, swollen, throbbing like a drunken monk's forehead. A bubo. Your very own. But you're not dead yet. Which, frankly, makes you one of the lucky ones. Most people get their ticket punched within 3 days. You've seen it. Wailing mothers, blackened toes. Entire families stiff in their chairs by sunrise. The smell? Always the same. Rot and despair. But here you are, still standing, shaky, sweating, but upright. That means today, you're going to work. Again. Because even though you're probably dying, people still need you. There are more lumps to cut, more limbs to wrap, and more desperate eyes watching your every move like, maybe, just maybe, you know what you're doing. You don't, but they don't know that. Outside, the town stinks like fear, and not metaphorical fear, real, actual fear, like wet wool, unwashed bodies, and something festering under the baker's stoop. You walk down the street, hunched, your scalpel tucked into your belt, your leech jar sloshing ominously, your breath wheezing like a cursed accordion. Everyone moves away when they see you. Not because they know you're sick, but because they know what you do. Barber-surgeon. Half barber, half butcher, half miracle worker. That's too many halves, you know. But math is for monks, and monks have fled the city. You enter the first house. The father is dead already, jaw locked in a silent scream, eyes wide with the kind of horror you don't unsee. The mother is holding a child who's hot with fever and covered in spots. You nod silently. You don't offer comfort. You don't promise healing. You just take out your knife. The blade is blackened. You boiled it last week. At least you think you did. Your hands are shaking worse now. You try to steady them to focus while you take deep breaths. You lance the bubo. The child screams, and you hear the mother weeping. The stench hits you, sour, rotten, thick as tar. You wipe your face with your sleeve and keep going, because that's what you do. You lance, you bleed, you bind, and then you move to the next house, and the next, and the next. Every cough feels louder today. Every heat wave through your body is sharper. You can't tell if it's the fever or just the work. Your stomach turns. You haven't eaten anything but half a crust of stale rye and a questionable onion since Tuesday. Someone hands you coins wrapped in cloth. You don't touch them directly. You've learned, at least a little. You drop them into your pouch and move on. By midday, your tunic is soaked through with sweat. The fever is worse now. Your mouth is dry. Your vision blurs at the edges. Someone asks if you're okay. You grunt. That's all they get. You sit for a moment on the edge of a well. A small one-eyed dog barks at you. Even it can smell the sickness. You look down at your reflection and barely recognize yourself. Pale, hollow-eyed, haunted. Just a little longer, you whisper. You've whispered that every day for a week. A few more houses, a few more cuts. One man bleeds too much and doesn't stop. Another refuses your help and tries to bite you. He dies an hour later. His wife thanks you anyway. You want to cry. Instead, you nod and walk away. By nightfall, you're staggering. You nearly collapse in the street. Someone helps you up. A baker's boy, maybe 14, not yet spotted. He calls you doctor. You almost laugh. You're not a doctor. You never were. You're a barber with a blade and a bucket. You cut hair, pull teeth, slice open boils, and pray the bleeding stops. Your training was watching your uncle do it once, while drunk on mead. He died of infected thumb 2 summers ago. And now you're the only one left. You make it home, collapse into your pile of straw. The smell doesn't bother you anymore. Nothing does. Your hands are covered in dried blood. Some of it yours, some of it not. You stare at the ceiling. You think about the people you saw today. The ones who screamed. The ones who didn't. You think about that lump under your arm. It's bigger now. It pulses in rhythm with your heartbeat. Your breath rattles in your throat. You're scared. You don't want to die. But you've seen enough to know how this ends. And yet, tomorrow, if you can still stand, you'll be out there again, with your scissors and your prayer, doing what no one else dares to do. Not because you're a hero, not because you're brave, but because someone has to. Now, you've just been accused of sorcery. Again, it's barely past noon. You were hoping today would just involve lancing a boil or sawing off a blackened toe. But no, someone's cousin's neighbor's goat died after your visit. And now, the village crone is pointing her crooked finger at you, like you personally hexed the livestock with your dirty scissors. Spoiler, you didn't. You were there to trim the owner's beard, not curse his animals. But that's the thing about being a barber surgeon in 1325. You're one part healer, one part hairstylist, and all parts suspicious. See, your job exists in a gray area, so murky it makes swamp water look clear. You cut hair, and you cut flesh. You stitch wounds and set bones, but you've got no university training, no fancy Latin vocabulary, no church blessing. Just a rusty kit, a decent aim, and enough local gossip to sink a bishop. To most people, that makes you either a miracle worker or the devil's assistant. Sometimes both. You try to ignore the stares as you walk through the market, but it's hard not to notice when children cross themselves and mothers whisper prayers as you pass. Your tunic's stained in last week's blood, not yours. And you've got dried herbs in one pocket and a crooked jawbone in the other. For medical purposes, obviously. But try explaining that to the baker who saw you muttering over a poultice and now swears you're conjuring spirits from the beyond. Healing in the Middle Ages is a tightrope walk between science and superstition, with a big vat of holy water sloshing below. If your patient survives, you're a blessed savior. If they die, well, someone's lighting a torch and probably sharpening a stake. You remember old Willem the cobbler. Poor bastard tripped over his own dog and cracked his skull on a church step. You wrapped his head with wine-soaked linen and bled him just enough to balance the humors. It should have worked. But when he started seizing and speaking in tongues, suddenly you were the problem, not the fractured cranium or the unwashed feet. No. It must have been dark forces. Your hands. Your fault. They locked you in the stocks for a day. Threw cabbage at your face. Someone tried to exorcise you with a spoonful of garlic and a Latin chant they barely remembered. It wasn't your best week, but you stayed. Because who else is going to remove a pus-dripping arrowhead from a knight's groin while the priest stands 20 feet away, praying for his soul instead of saving his flesh? That's your job. You, with your bucket of tools and your deeply questionable luck. Now, don't get it twisted. You're not entirely innocent. You've dabbled. Everyone does. A charm stitched into a bandage. A prayer whispered over a broken limb. You once tried binding a sprained wrist with a strip of parchment inscribed with a saint's name because the patient swore it cured his uncle's gout. Did it work? Who knows? But he paid double. Problem is, the line between protective magic and wicked heresy is thinner than your last suture. And in a world where people genuinely believe that sneezing 3 times in a row means the devil's nearby, you better watch your back. And your tongue. You learned that the hard way when Agnes, the midwife, was dragged into the square for using mugwort during a breech birth. You stood in the crowd. You said nothing. You couldn't. If you spoke, you'd be next. She screamed your name once, just once, and every eye turned to you like vultures at a feast. But the priest stepped in. For once, the robes of religion saved rather than damned. He said Agnes was misguided, not malicious. She was spared. You breathed again, but you didn't sleep for a week. Your reputation now? complicated. Some call you a necessary evil. Others leave bread at your door like offerings to a minor deity or an impending threat. Children chant rhymes about you. He cuts your hair, he cuts your hand, he buries both beneath the land. Harsh, but catchy. There are whispers, always whispers, that you raise the dead, that your scissors glow at night, that you keep fingernails in jars. Okay, yes, that last one is technically true, but it's for reference. And still, they come. The sick, the bleeding, the desperate. Because superstition or not, you've saved more lives than most lords. You've pulled rotten teeth, drained fevers, stitched slashed bellies with picket thread, and a prayer. You don't promise miracles. You promise effort, pain, maybe survival. And on the rare nights when the moon is full and the town is quiet, you look at your tools, lined up in their bloody leather roll, and wonder what they really are. Implementations of healing? Or instruments of fear? Both? There was a time you thought about leaving, heading for the coast, changing your name, becoming a cobbler or a monk or someone no one ever accuses of cursing livestock. But you didn't, because beneath the grime and the glares, someone's got to hold the blade when no one else will. Someone's got to stand in the liminal space between science and faith, between life and death. So you stay. And the next time someone knocks on your door with a festering leg and eyes full of hope, you'll answer with your scissors and your prayer. And maybe, just maybe, enough skill to keep them alive. But you keep your bags packed, just in case the goat dies again. You've made it through another day without sawing your own fingers off. Well done. That's no small feat, considering your profession involves knives, blood, and a public who believes demons cause toothaches. It's 1325. You're not just a man with scissors. You are a barber-surgeon, a title that means two very different things depending on who's bleeding. To most, you're the fellow who shaves beards and cuts bangs. To the desperate, you're the last stop between life and death. A man with no formal training, no university lectures, no divine blessing. Just calloused hands, a few rusty blades, and a bucket. And outside your little shop, there it stands, a pole, painted red and white, twisting up like a peppermint stick, except there's nothing sweet about it. The sight of it makes men pause, makes mothers clutch their children a little tighter. That pole is your sign, your symbol, your warning. Here, blood is spilled. The red for the blood, the white for the bandages, and the pole itself? That comes from the part where you'd make your patients grip it, tight, as you sawed through their flesh. Because even the bravest scream when the bone bites back. You didn't invent the pole. It came from a time even older than you, when barbers were surgeons, dentists, bloodletters, leechers, boil lancers, hernia fixers, and sometimes part-time executioners. The pole was your branding, before branding was a thing, a rotating shout across the street. If you're leaking, limping, or need a leech, step right up. Some say the original poles had actual bloody rags twisted around them. No paint, just dried bandages fluttering in the breeze like macabre flags. And why not? What better way to say, we've got experience, than displaying the used wrappings of the morning's amputations? Sure, today it might look cheerful, spinning outside modern salons with fluorescent lights and bad pop music. But in your world, that pole doesn't mean style. It means scars. You remember the first time you put one up, You were 17. Fresh off your second accidental nick of someone's femoral artery. The man didn't make it. You were still scrubbing blood from your boots when your mentor handed you the painted pole and said, "Stick this in the ground. People need to know where to crawl." So you did, and they came because no one else would touch them. Physicians? Too expensive? Monks? Too busy praying? Priests? Would rather die than be seen with a man who cuts flesh and speaks Latin like a drunk fishmonger. So they came to you. The people with ulcers, bone fractures, infected teeth, festering wounds and growths in places you'd rather not describe. They came limping, crying, screaming, whispering, always hoping, always afraid. And your pole stood outside, watching them all, unblinking. A totem of pain and possibility. It's not glamorous work. In fact, it's barely even work. It's more like a series of bets placed with dirty tools. You bet you can stop the bleeding before the patient dies. You bet the leg you're sawing off isn't already gangrenous up to the groin. You bet the screaming won't attract the town guard. Every morning, you rinse the pole. Every evening, it's stained again. Sometimes with blood. Sometimes with something worse. You try not to think about it too much. Because if you do, you might start seeing things, like the ghost of little Henrik, whose jaw you broke trying to remove a rotten molar, or the woman whose arm you amputated, only to realize later it was dislocated, not infected. Or the time you tried trepanning on a man who just had a headache from dehydration. The pole doesn't care. It never judges. But you do. And yet, that twisted pole has saved lives, more than you can count. It has stood through rain and snow, through riots and plagues, through the deaths of kings and births of bastards. It is your badge of honor and your silent confession. A barber's pole is the cross you bear, minus the salvation. To the passing eye, it spins idly in the wind. But to you, it spins with memory. Every stripe a scar, every rotation a story. You once thought of taking it down. After a girl bled out from a thigh wound you couldn't bind, you threw your tools across the room and sat shaking in the dark. But at sunrise, you walked outside. The pole was still there, unmoved, waiting. You straightened it, cleaned the base, and unlocked the door. Because you knew someone would come. They always do. The church says your work is unclean. That bloodletting is an offense to God. That opening a body is defiling a sacred vessel. And maybe they're right. But when Brother Thomas broke his ribs in a fall, who came knocking at your door? The priest. Cloak muddy, eyes wild. "Please," he said. He's turning blue. You cut open the monk's chest right there on the table, broke the ribs with a chisel, let the air escape. It worked, barely. The priest never thanked you, but he never complained again either. Your pole doesn't care about doctrine. It spins whether you save or fail. It spins when the people cheer and when they spit. You've seen children touch it for luck. You've seen soldiers avoid its shadow. You've seen it soaked in rain, in blood, in wine, spilled by the drunk who thought it was a tavern sign. You've been called a butcher, a miracle worker, a death cheater, a fraud. But mostly, you're just tired. Tired of the screaming, tired of the guesses, tired of standing next to a pole that screams the truth of your trade more loudly than you ever could. Here, flesh is opened, bones are broken, blood is spilled, and yet, here, life sometimes begins again. That's why you still hoist the pole each day, why you repaint it when the stripes fade, why even when your hands shake and your back aches, you walk outside and straighten it with care. Because the people need to know. They need to see it. They need to believe that someone, somewhere, might still help them, even if it hurts. And so it spins. You're still breathing, still holding that blood-crusted knife, still wearing the same leather apron that's seen more insides than the local gravedigger. But you're not the same. You used to flinch. You used to pray. Now, you just stare at your hands and wonder how much of the red under your fingernails is someone else's life, or your own soul peeling away, layer by layer. You wake up this morning not with the roar of hunger or the ache of cold, but with a whisper in your bones. Don't pick up the scalpel today. But you do, of course. You always do. Because barber surgeons don't get days off. Not when the wounds keep coming and the sick keep knocking. You swore no oath. There's no Hippocratic promise binding you. Just habit. Just stubbornness. Just guilt. Your first patient is already waiting outside your door, or what used to be your door, before the rats chewed through it and the hinges rusted into oblivion. He's holding his guts in with a blood-soaked cabbage leaf. You know, before he even opens his mouth, he's not going to make it. But he begs. They always beg. So you nod. You let him in. You whisper your usual lie. We'll see what we can do. And you get to work. The room smells like old iron, sweat, and despair. Your assistant, a 12-year-old who stopped crying 3 amputations ago, hands you the bone saw without speaking. He knows the rhythm now. So do you. Clamp, cut, bleed, burn, bandage, hope, or not. Because today, you slip. It's not a dramatic, blade-to-throat kind of mistake. It's subtle. Your hand hesitates. Your cut isn't clean. And in that moment, that single twitch of doubt, you see it. The patient's eyes widen. Not in pain, he expected that, but in fear. You are afraid. And if the barber surgeon is afraid, well then, who's left to save anyone? He dies before nightfall. Infection? Blood loss? Doesn't matter. What matters is that you stare at the bowl of ruined gauze for hours afterward. Just sit there, quiet. Number A. Little piece of you died with him. A piece that doesn't grow back. That's the truth no one tells you when they hand you the shears and the bucket. It's not just about the gore or the screams. It's about the accumulation, the faces, the names, the ones who looked at you like you were their last chance, and maybe you were. And now, they're bones in the earth. Or worse, in a cart no one claims. You once believed you were helping. A useful tool in God's mysterious, often extremely unhygienic plan. But now you wonder, have you healed more than you've harmed? Have you even kept score? And if you did, would the tally be worth it? You've stopped dreaming, mostly. But when you do, it's always the same. A pair of hands reaching out. You can't tell if they're thanking you or trying to drag you under. You weren't trained. You weren't taught. You were shown. One day you were holding down a man's leg, and the next you were sawing it off. Trial by fire, only without the fire. just blood and screaming. You thought you'd get used to it. And you did. That's the problem. Your tools, scissors, forceps, scalpels, they don't shine anymore. Not because the metal's gone dull, but because you have. There was a time you'd polish them, line them up with pride. Now they lie, scattered, caked in yesterday's failure. You still use them, but with less hope, more muscle memory. And yet, tomorrow, you'll do it again, because someone has to. The priests pray, the knights kill, and the apothecaries grind herbs into useless powder. But you sew people shut. You try to hold the human body together with nothing but your bare hands and a bladder full of urine-soaked wine. You tell yourself it matters. But some days like today, you wonder. You step outside at dusk. The air smells like ash and livestock. A dog growls somewhere in the mist. A drunkard pukes against a wall. Life, in all its rotten glory, continues. But you feel still, heavy, like a ghost wearing your own skin. You think of the barber's pole, red and white, a cheery twist to the unknowing. To the townsfolk, it means haircuts and shaves. To you, it's veins and bandages, pain and patience, blood and bone. The pole spins, endlessly. So do you. You pass a mirror. Rare thing, glass. But there you are, older than your years, eyes sunken, skin grayed. Your hands twitch. They always do now. Phantom limbs from surgeries you never finished. You touch your face. You don't recognize the man looking back. That night, your apprentice asks if he can sleep somewhere else, away from the tools. He doesn't say why. He doesn't need to. You lie in bed, listening to the wind clawing at your shutters. You wonder how many more you'll lose before someone loses you. Whether you'll die mid-cut, slumped over another man's open chest. Whether anyone will even bother finishing the job. And still, you'll rise. Because despite everything, the death, the rot, the shaking hands, you know that some do survive. That sometimes your cuts are clean. That once in a while, someone walks out of your shack breathing, crying, grateful. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.